So Bellator 287 is taking place this weekend in Italy, which is pretty interesting, and to be brutally honest with you guys, it's not a very good Bellator card. The main event is headlined by a guy making his debut, and he hasn't fought for 3.5 years, but if you don't know, that is Mansour Barnaoui, who was a great prospect, who was a guy that the UFC missed out on signing this man. I feel like Bellator probably just offered him a little bit more money, and the UFC weren't ready to pay up. And they should have, because Mansour Barnaoui would have made a great debut on his UFC Paris card. But that's fine, let's just get straight into the fights. We've got Oleg Popov taking on Denis Stoichnik. I'm going to be picking Oleg Popov here. I think he's going to win by KO in the first or second round. I mean, he did take 2 rounds to KO poor Antonio Silva. And Denis Stoichnik is actually a former UFC fighter. He fought in the UFC in 2007 and lost to Cain Velasquez and Stefan Struve. Off the top of my head, I believe he got finished in both of those fights. He got submitted in one and knocked out in the other. And since then, he's gone on a pretty good win streak, but he hasn't been beaten in very good competition, and he is almost 43 years old. Oleg Popov is a guy that the UFC probably should have tried to scoop up, but I think as soon as he fought Antonio Silva, maybe the chances of that happening were pretty low, because I don't think many people are too happy about Antonio Bigfoot Silva still being allowed to fight. It's a tough situation, man. It's really hard to watch. But Luke Trainer versus Lucas Alcina should be a good matchup. I'm going to be picking Luke Trainer here. I feel like maybe minus 700 is a little bit wide. And in fact, I thought it was so wide, I was going to have a look at maybe having a look at the underdog. And I started watching Lucas Alcina's fights, and this guy just doesn't have anything for Luke Trainer, in my opinion. He was getting combinations landed on him by Juan Carlos Lopez, and this guy is just a brawler that only throws combinations with 110%. Like all he's trying to do is brawl, and Alcina was even able to get him to take him to the mat, and then he was able to have success there, but he wasn't really able to do anything with it. I just don't think he's going to give Luke Trainer any problems. I think Luke Trainer, if he can land the same combinations that Lopez was landing on Alcina, I think we're going to see Trainer get a KO, so I'm going to be picking Trainer by KO in this matchup here. Stephen Hill, another fighter, which I feel like maybe the odds are a little bit too wide in his favour. We're talking minus 700 over a guy that's a lot more experienced than him and has fought much better competition, but Andrea Fusi has fought twice in 3 years. He rematched Walter Pugliese, who he beat by split decision about 4 years ago, and he lost that one there. And then he got submitted in the first round by a 44-year-old man. Yeah. He got taken down and dominated, and he had absolutely nothing on the ground for Piotr Nize, and I feel like the same sort of situation might happen with Stephen Hill here. I feel like maybe Bellator watched Andrea Fusi get dominated by Nize on the ground and thought, yeah, you know what, this is going to be a good debut for Stephen Hill, who we're going to try and build up a little bit. He's 5-0 already against terrible competition. His one and only good win is over this guy called Matthew Finlay. He was 3-1 at the time, and honestly, Stephen Hill made it look easy. He took him down at will, got some ground and pound off, ground and pounded him out in the first round, and finished him with ground and pound in the second. I'm picking Hill to win this one here. I'm expecting a finish on the mat, but I would not be too surprised if it goes the distance and Hill wins using his wrestling. Next one here, Nicolo Soli versus Barama Kamara. Wow, I cannot believe I butchered that name. Barama Kamara, I apologize. Barama Kamara is my pick. I believe he's going to get a KO here, probably in the, I'm going to go second round. I think he got a first round KO over Victor Vacheri, and I don't think he was actually predicted to beat that fight, to win that fight, sorry, and I think he's going to be able to beat Soli here. Soli does have pretty good grappling, and he could maybe mix it up with the grappling it is in Italy, which maybe could help Soli a little bit having the fans on his side. But Kamara's got a much longer reach than him, 6 inches longer, and he's also got a pretty good height advantage. He's 6'4". Soli's tall for 170 as well, he's 6'2". But I think Kamara's going to use that range and his power, and I think he's going to get a KO at some point over Soli in this fight here. Moving on, we've got an underdog pick. I am actually going to be picking Kamil Onykshuk to win his Bellator debut against a guy that has made a pretty big name for himself in Bellator. He's actually got a lot of really good wins. Kevin Fryer, Chris Honeycutt, John Salter he lost to, but he beat Mike Shipman and Fabian Edwards, who's on the co-main event spot, but he hasn't fought for 2 years. And Stenis, I think, is going to be looking to get this fight to the mat, but as long as it's on the feet, I think Kamil Onykshuk is going to be... He's going to be in his element, man. This guy is really good. I feel like he's actually quite maybe underrated in this matchup, being plus 200. I do think that he should be the underdog, but plus 200 is a little bit wide. And this guy's striking is really good. You know, he made quick work of Vladimir Fedin, and he looked pretty good in the clinch in that fight as well. He knocked out a 6-2 opponent, lost to a more experienced opponent, but This guy's striking has developed a lot in between that period of time, and now it's been 10 months since he last fought as well. And he last fought at 185 pounds against Vladimir Fedin. Before that, I believe he was fighting at 175 pounds or welterweight, one of the two. It's kind of a weird sort of situation there, but in that time, he would have filled out his frame. He did not look small for 185 pounds in his last fight, and I think he's actually going to have a pretty good advantage on the feet. I think Stennis is going to be trying to take him down, but I really like Onishuk to maybe get a KO on this one. His striking is so crisp. He's got really good kicks. I'm liking Camille in this matchup. I really do think that he's going to get it done. We move on. Yves Landau versus Walter Cogliandro. This is another situation where I just feel like Cogliandro doesn't really have anything that could make Landau lose, if that makes any sense at all. Landau's had an up and down run in Bellator, but I think he's going to get a win over Walter here. Walter is winning and losing to guys that just aren't amazing. You know, he lost to Jay Huakban, who was 9-5 at the time, 30-27 loss, split decision win over a 5-2 opponent. He got submitted in Cage Warriors, and before that, you know, split decision wins over guys that he should be able to beat if he's fighting Yves Landau, you know what I mean? And I feel like Yves Landau moving down to 145, it's a risky move. I'm not too sure how he's going to look with the weight cut, but Cogliandro, he just looked so slow against Jay Huakban. For a guy that's a counter-striker, which is what Cogliandro brings, is counter-striking to the match, he's really slow. And Huakban was just able to be faster than him on the feet and give him problems, and Cogliandro never even tried to get the fight to the mat. So I'm going to pick Landau in this one here. Not too sure about a finish, but I think he should get the win on the feet. Chiara Pinko versus Manuela Marcineto. This is a weird situation here where Marcineto is 3-0, but you look at that, she's 5-0 in her last 5 fights, and that's because she made her debut as an amateur and lost, and then she took a pro fight and lost, and then she won as an amateur a few times, then she moved as a pro and she won a few times. She's kind of bounced back and forth between a pro and being an amateur, which is a little bit strange. I'm not too sure how and why you're able to do that, but Chiara Pinko is the pick. I'm not confident at all. Minus 290 is way too wide for this fight. But they have a similar game. Pinko does have submissions, which she could maybe bring to the game. I don't think she's going to get a sub. I think she's going to win a decision, and we're just going to move on from that one there. Pinko's the pick. Not confident in it whatsoever. That we move on. Thibault Gouti versus Alfie Davis. I'm actually picking Alfie Davis to win this fight here. And believe it or not, I feel like it might be a little bit of a controversial pick. But I feel like I've got a pretty good read on Alfie Davis, and I think he should be able to beat Thibault Gouti, who's a former UFC fighter, and he has gotten a pretty good win streak recently, and he did win his debut against Lewis Long. But Alfie Davis has been in Bellator for a while. They've been building him up for a little bit. He lost to Alexander Shabalai, but that happens. You know what I mean? He went to a draw with Tim Wilde, which is a bit iffy, but I feel like Alfie Davis really should get the win in this one here. I'm picking him by decision as a slight underdog, not confident though. But it is what it is. Now, Simon Biong's fighting Dragos Subko in the next fight here. Weird one. Dragos Subko hasn't fought in MMA for 3 years. I'm actually not too sure what he's been doing in between that period of time. But I'm assuming he's been kickboxing because he's got a Glory kickboxing fight on his Tapology profile. But at the end of the day, Dragos Subko has fought twice in MMA in 7 years. And his one win recently, his one win in the last 6 years is over a guy that was 0-1. And Simon Biong is 8-2. He's a guy that Bellator's trying to build up. I don't know why, because he's too old to be a prospect. But he fights out of Italy as well. I feel like they're trying to give Biong a win here. He beat Luke Trainer, who's 5-0, who's fighting on this card, I believe. Christian Edwards he lost to, who's a good prospect. Yeah, Biong really should win this matchup here. Subko might have a good stand-up game, but I feel like Biong's just going to win the fight. Now, Savadzkon Kamadov versus Jose Maria Tome is an interesting fight because Jose Maria Tome, you might recognize this guy. He used to be Henry Cejudo's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach, but in MMA he might have the most padded record that you've ever seen in your entire life. Look at the state of this. You know what I mean? He goes 13-0 and then fights a 2-0 guy in Leandro Higo at the time and loses. And then he fights Juicio Formiga when he's 14-1 and loses. And he keeps fighting and loses to a guy that's 3-0 when he's 16-2. Keeps fighting against guys that don't have Tapology pages, like, you know, like red flags that is popping up like nothing right now. I feel like the guys that popped Askar Mozharov for having a padded record might need to look into this guy, because this is not Flash. How do we know that these actually exist? You know what I mean? This is sketchy stuff. And then he comes into the UFC 33-3, gets knocked out by John Lineker, comes in 33-4, gets knocked out by Dustin Ortiz, keeps fighting, and then he's loses to Askar Askarov as well. And another undefeated guy. I think he's lost since then, though, because I was going to say maybe he could be a good prospect. Yeah, he has. He's still probably a good prospect, though. But anyway, the point is, I'm picking Kamadov to win. Minus 800 is pretty tricky, though, because Muratomi, man, being a pretty good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player, he could throw something up off his back, which could get a little bit crazy. Kamadov should win. Almost all of his wins are by decision. He's not the most exciting fighter in the world. Maybe he can stay safe on top, or maybe he can get a ground and pound KO. But I'm going with Kamadov here. Minus 800 might be a bit wide. Davy Gallen versus Daniel Scatizzi. It's once again one of those situations where Davy Gallen just should be able to beat this guy. I don't think Scatizzi has much that's going to scare Davy Gallen here. And Davy Gallen, if you don't know, he's actually the guy that retired Ross Pearson with the craziest rolling thunder kick in MMA that I've ever seen. It was like 1 minute to go in the third round. And David Gallen just throws this rolling thunder kick out of nowhere, knocks Ross Pearson out unconscious, and Ross Pearson has never fought in MMA since then, which is kind of crazy. And David Gallen has gone on to have a pretty successful career in Bellator, and I think he's going to continue that, and I think he's going to be able to beat Daniel Scatizzi in this one here. I'm going to go with decision, but he could maybe get a KO as well. Maybe he could throw up a rolling thunder with 20 seconds left in the entire fight and get a KO. You never know with that David Gallen. That's mad, though. Justin Gonzalez versus Andrew Fisher. This is once again a fight which Justin Gonzalez just should be able to win. Andrew Fisher is almost he's 37 and a half years old. Gonzalez is almost 32, so he's still kind of leaving his prime, but he's too old to be classified as a prospect now. But he doesn't have any finishing ability. He didn't finish Zach Zane on Dana White's Contender Series, and Zach Zane is a guy that just gets finished by everyone. So, yeah, he's not quite in that level, and he even beat Jake Childers when he was undefeated. But he's gone on. He's beaten Kai Kamaka by split decision. He lost the decision to Aaron Pico, and he's just, all of these wins that he's been having are pretty close. So, he's 2 wins in Bellator, 2 split decision wins. That's pretty iffy, but I think he should be able to beat Andrew Fisher, who's almost 38 years old now at this point. Gonzalez just should win a decision. It will be what it is. Sal Rogers versus Tim Wilde. I'm picking Sal Rogers here to win by decision or submission. I think if the fight gets to the mat, he's going to have a lot of success, and I think if Tim Wilde can keep the fight on the feet, it could get pretty interesting, but I think Rogers is that good of a grappler that if he gets the fight to the mat, he's going to have a bit of success, and I'm going to be picking Sal Rogers to win. I'm almost confident enough in him to win by submission, but I'm going to still side with decision or submission in this one here. He beat Georgi Karakarian, but then he lost to Mads Barnaoui, and that happens. And he beat the 13-3 opponent, lost to Daniel Reichelt 3 years ago. That happens too. So, Saul Rogers, he's been fighting good competition. I think Tim Wilde is a guy that he should be able to beat. And I'm just going to use his grappling to do it as well, in my opinion. Fabian Edwards taking on Charlie Ward. If you don't know this, Fabian Edwards is actually Leon Edwards, the UFC welterweight champion's younger brother, and he fights at 185, and he's fighting an almost 42-year-old man in Charlie Ward, and I think he's going to get the KO at some point in the fight. Fabian Edwards is a technical striker, he's a fast striker, and he was doing pretty good things until he ran into Costello Vance Deniz, and he lost a pretty close competitive split decision there. And then he lost to Austin Vanderford, which I guess isn't the best look in the world, but it's still not that bad of a loss to have, and to be honest. And then he knocked out poor Lyoto Machida. But I feel like he's going to be able to use this opportunity. I think he's going to be able to knock out Charlie Ward, who at the end of the day is almost 42 years old. So give me him to win by a knockout. And now Mansour Barnaoui, making his debut in Bellator in the main event of an overseas card is kind of crazy to me. He hasn't fought for 3.5 years. I tried to do some research on this guy. I actually have no idea what he's been doing in that period of time, but Mansour Barnaoui at one point was probably one of the hottest unsigned prospects ever, to be honest. He's actually kind of crazy, and he should have been signed by the UFC for that France card, and they really missed out on that one there. But Adam Piccolotti is a guy who should be able to finish. Piccolotti's a hard guy to finish, but he's not a guy that I think should be able to finish Barnaoui. I think Barnaoui is going to hurt him on the feet at some point in the fight, and then just kind of ride that momentum and then eventually get a submission or even a KO. So I'm picking Barnaoui in this one here. It's going to be very interesting to see how Barnaoui looks 3.5 years later. I feel like he's just wasted. I know he won $1 million, from this Road FC tournament, but I feel like he just wasted the prime of his career, you know what I mean? He's 30 years old now. You know, he's a couple of years away from being labelled too old to be a prospect. And it's just kind of like, what were you doing between the age of 26 and 30? You know, like, you could have been fighting, mate. You even could have just fought once a year, you know? And he just wasn't. And I just don't understand. I'm picking Barnaoui to win by finish, but I just don't understand what he was doing in that period of time. 3.5 years is a long time to come back from a hiatus, you know what I mean? So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see.